All right. And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Kuumba Kickback. This panel is the navigating fandom as Black and folks of color. Before I introduce myself, I'll introduce my fellow panelists. Let's start with Mel. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mel. I am a part-time writer. I'm a librarian. I'm co-host of the Nerds of Prey podcast, which is currently on hiatus, but we're coming back soon. So that's me.
Next, Joy.
Hi, I'm Joy Piedmont. I'm a teacher, librarian, and in Fandom World, I co-host and co-produce Reality Bomb, a Doctor Who podcast, and I also co-host a Doctor Who podcast called 5 Years Rapid. So dual podcasting stuff going on.
Right.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stacie. I have a blog, which as of late hasn't been very active, but it's all book reviews, focusing on just everything. I read everything, so I blog about all the books that I read, or I try to. This has been trying a couple of months, let me tell you, but yeah.
My name is Amanda-Rae. I'm a blogger, a book contributor to the U.S. NBPOC. I am a Twitter live tweeter of all things, British period dramas and also modern British dramas as well. This panel is basically my idea of processing the past couple months, how hard it is to be a person of color and someone Black in fandom when there are folks trying to figure out, all of a sudden they're realizing the racism is a problem. Although it's been a problem in fandom for years and years and years that folks don't talk about it. And also especially in smaller fandoms where you're less likely for a whole variety of reasons to come across people who share your identity and have an idea of what you're going through as you're trying to have fun in fandom. So to start off this panel, now we've all introduced ourselves, I want to ask the panelists, how long have you been participating in fandoms outside of the big franchises, or if you haven't been participating, why? I'm going to go kind of clockwise this time, so I'll start with Stacie.
I think for me personally, I've been in a larger fandom for about 2 years now almost, and I think that's really only with Black Girls Create where I've ever really dived into fandoms. For me, going into certain spaces has always been very draining, I guess is the best way to say it. Even now, seeing certain things in the things that I do participate in, like with blogging, I'm on book Twitter a lot, and it's very just frustrating seeing some of the constant pushback that you see when it comes to diversity, when it comes to authors speaking out, when it comes to characterizations and, trauma being portrayed more than joy. It's just exhausting. So for me, and I've only been on Twitter for the last few years, so that's been the constant struggle, is deciding how much do I want to dive in to this topic, issue, discussion, when it seems like there's a new topic, issue, discussion that's happening every few months, if not every few days, if not every couple of weeks. So that's one of the things that I've always noticed, is diving into fandoms just takes a lot of energy. And I don't necessarily know if I always have the energy to combat everything that's coming at you, especially when you open your mouth, all you get is that pushback because people don't understand and they don't necessarily want to see where you're coming from when you do discuss your lived or your own experiences, basically.
Joy, what's your response to that question?
Well, I've been involved in Doctor Who fandom since around 2012. But it's funny, it's taken a really long time, I think, even though it's only been 8 years, to find the spaces where there just were more people of color. And part of that is, it's weird because, right, you dip your toes into fandom, you're exposed to whoever you're exposed to. If that's a predominantly white space, you kind of have to make this decision of okay, I still love this thing enough to kind of be uncomfortable every now and then. And then it really just took pushing through that and looking for more and more voices. And maybe like 3 years ago, I found you know, Robin, Fiona, and Constance doing their podcast about Doctor Who, and I was like, oh, finally, people are talking about the show in a way that I feel like very connected to. And like, it's not like those conversations weren't already happening in other places, but very often I was like one of only a couple people, or like, you know, Amanda and I have done panels together where, you know, it's not super common to have like a bunch of people of color fans in the same place. But I've always been a little reluctant to be like really a part of participatory fandom, like very actively, just because it's like, I think like Stacie said, it just takes so much energy regardless, right? Regardless of the issues that you're talking about. It's such an emotional commitment. And so adding like the aspects of identity on top of it just make it so much harder.
Mel, what's your reaction to this comment?
Well, I started off in fandom in the mid-90s, so like a long time ago. Writing like Sailor Moon fanfic and like Gundam Wing and going in X-Files chat rooms. So like I didn't know anybody was black. I didn't know anybody was white. I just assumed. So like it was like kind of a nice time where it's like I didn't know what anybody was. I'm just gonna assume everybody is a person of color because I don't know any better. And then I started going to conventions and I learned otherwise.
Yeah.
That reality bat hit me hard. So it was always like a weird feeling of feeling kind of like an outsider, an outcast, and something that you love, and wanting to be accepted, but at the same time you're getting these weird looks from people like, but why are you into this? And just like, I shouldn't have to justify why I'm here. I shouldn't have to fight for my position to be here. You didn't. So why do I have to? So it just like for a while there, it seemed like more of a struggle than it had to be.
For me, like my main fandoms outside of Doctor Who, where there, of course, there's been some resistance there with acceptance, but my other fandoms, the British queer drama side of fandom, we don't really have conventions, but online, pretty much everyone, with a couple of exceptions and some groups here and there, are white women, and are especially older than me in particular, because I'm in my early 30s. So I'm talking to people online who are in their 60s and 70s or 50s, and I'm like, whoa, there's not just a race factor, there's also an age factor, obviously cultural differences as well. It's sort of a lot of pushback that I've gotten in fandom is sometimes racist, but also sometimes ageist, because they're like, well, I'm older, you should listen to me because I've lived life more. And I'm like, not when it comes to issues of race, because I've lived life that you can never imagine. So a lot of the pushback, either it's great to be in fandom emotionally, but then also that realization that you are an outsider sort of like does hit you hard. Like when it hit me hard was I went to, back in the day when Downton Abbey was running, I went to those PBS PR events where they would premiere each season, and I was pretty much often the only person of color there who wasn't like the site staff or the catering, which is weird. But I mean, I rocked it anyway, but it was sort of like, that's when it hit me, like, okay, I can't pretend that race isn't a factor, but then you have to kind of negotiate and deal with the fact that other people are now noticing you for that, either in person or online. And that's sort of, it is a lot of emotional labor, because especially when something happens, it's sort of that moment of knowing that you have to commit emotional energy to this is just definitely difficult. Now, in your area, in your spaces, we already mentioned, obviously, Black Girl Nerds space. Are there other bloggers of color in your fandom spaces that you have noticed talking about these issues, or is it you by yourself just advocating for yourself?
Who wants to start that off? You guys want me? Okay. I mean, for me, it's whenever I see issues that I feel like I need to engage in, outside of Black Girls Create, because I feel like we've got this niche there where the discussions can happen. They can happen freely. They can happen with nuance, and we don't have to worry about judgment. We can just spill whatever it is that we're feeling. And even when the discussions get heated and there's almost a burning, there's always that respect factor, and there's always that that community that I feel like we need a space in. When I'm in other spaces where I feel like things need to be said and things need to be addressed, it's almost like bracing for impact. Like, is this going to be the one that sets anything off? I know I have people that will ride, but at the same time, it's always this is one of those things where if I open my mouth and say anything, even something as simple as what just premiered with Lovecraft Country, where luckily we do have a lot of Black bloggers and a lot of Black podcasters out there that are talking about it. Bringing up certain things is going to be what brings that pushback, because there's people that are intimidated by the idea of this show being led by a cast of Black people, and also it being something that addresses racism so starkly. And getting into those discussions, it's always very just, I could be expressing joy, and you know that there might be some idiot that sees that joy and sees it as something that's a threat. And it's just, it can be exhausting even thinking about it, because there's so many times you go to push that tweet and you're like, never mind, I don't care. I don't need this in my life or space right now. So you just step all the way back. And I feel like that's one of the most toxic things about fandoms. It had to be months back. A friend of mine had made a comment about the new Hunger Games book coming out and how she was not interested at all in seeing this story about President Snow. And it ended up becoming this huge discussion where she basically had to face a whole bunch of white people that had a problem with her not wanting to hear about a racist and an idiot and somebody that ended up being a bigot in it. And you're just, those moments where you see how bad the backlash can be for simply voicing your opinion definitely always makes you think twice, or even more than twice, about how you choose to express yourself when you want to be a part of a fandom, but you don't want to deal with those people that feel like they have ownership over that fandom and that they are the ones that get to determine how stories should be told.
I relate to that so much, Stacie, because that's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot over the past few months, just with Doctor Who fandom. I think that what's really great about Doctor Who fandom is I think that people of color exist in the fandom. It's a really actually diverse group of people. It's just harder to find them because the people who have the most prominent voices tend to be white, men, mostly cis. There's like a really strong LGBT presence in the fandom, and there always has been. But in general, it's kind of like a homogenous group in the forefront. And so it's people, doing blogging and podcasting who are people of color are there. It's just that they're not as visible. So once I found those people, I felt like just so much, I don't know, I guess like felt more like, oh, this is a space that I can be comfortable in, and I don't feel like I have to like compromise myself to be in. But at the same time, I know that I've kind of made like a silent, not so silent because I've talked about it a couple times now, but like a silent pledge to myself to not really talk about race and the show online, like mostly on Twitter, because like I don't feel that the energy it costs me to have to then engage in conversations, even from people who really want to learn, like that just is taking too much out of me. And I'm like, I can't spend my time doing that. And I feel like there's like other ways that I can be engaging in this fandom that make me happy. That doesn't make me happy. Like it might be good, but also it's just too much of a toll on me. And so it feels more comfortable, like you said, just to have those conversations in spaces where I know I don't have to do any education for people. And even if it's something like, if I'm talking about like, oh, the Asian representation in this, episode wasn't good, and the friends that I'm talking about that with, like, don't necessarily have personal experience with it, I know that they're not going to like question it, right? And that's the difference. It's just kind of like a way that people bring themselves to those conversations that really is huge. And so, yeah, like it's not that there aren't people of color in the fandom. It's just like, it then just comes down to a choice of like, how much do you want to engage in conversations that may just take a lot out of you?
Yeah. Anything to add, Mel?
Yeah, I agree completely with what Joy said. These conversations are exhausting, and I don't really have it in me a lot of the times to have them because I don't want to be attacked. I don't want to have to put my Twitter account on private and avoid it for a week. I don't want to do that. Yeah. And sometimes that ends up happening because like the minute you bring up race, then it's like all of a sudden you have people coming in from all over the place just to say, no, it's not about race. If you make it about race, you're racist. You're racist yourself. Or why do you always have to talk about this? Why are you ruining everything? And it's exhausting and it hurts. So it's easier to have those conversations in places where people understand you or are willing to hear your opinion and willing to engage in it with you with like civility.
And to bring it back to one of the things that Joy said, because it's extremely telling, what's the forefront of your fandom? Like, for example, with Harry Potter, the forefront of that fandom is starkly white. So it almost feels as if there is no way to break through that boundary. I came across BGC by chance. Like, it's one of those moments where I found the space and was shocked that the space existed to the extent that it existed, because I thought I'd been alone for the 20 plus years I've been reading. Well, yeah, about 20 plus years I've been reading the books. I hadn't had that engagement. Even when I had been vocal about it on Twitter, even when I was talking to friends about it, I didn't know that this could exist because it hadn't been shown to me, because the people that were in front hadn't thought to highlight it, because there was no need for them to highlight it because they were in their comfort zone. So it's one of those moments where you feel like there's a block in front of you, and it's because no one thought to move it, because they knew that BGC existed. But I had never seen, regardless of all the people that I've been following for a while on Twitter before I finally came across BGC, no one had ever really given them the leg and the, attention that they deserved in order to get that bigger, at least in my opinion, that bigger outreach that would have made me feel like, oh, wow, this community is here. It's been here. I didn't know about it. Why? It always goes back to that. Why did I have to look in this space when it was so easy for me to find you? You were aware of them. You know what your space looks like. And it's because they never have to consider anything outside of their own zone and their own bubble. So they want you to conform to that bubble instead of finding a space or promoting a space where more people are accepted, more conversations are acceptable than what they're used to having. That's one of the things that I definitely noticed when I got into BGC. It was very much like, oh, wow, this entire time, no idea. Just out here by myself unnecessarily. These are conversations I could have been having for years with people that really understood where I was coming from and the lens that I was looking at these books through. And I just didn't know.
For me, in outside of Doctor fandom, the only there are a couple bloggers here. The only major space outside of Doctor fandom for folks of color who are into the period drama side of things are, I found the Blacklanders on Twitter a couple years ago. Blacklanders with Z, by the way. They were a group of Black Outlander fans, and mostly women. I was like, wait, finally, folks who look like me and are in this fandom. Wow, that's great. But besides that, the Blacklanders, there's not a lot of spaces in period drama fandom because I had to create my own space on my own Twitter account, because my goal eventually is to create the period drama version of Black Girls Create, except the thing is, it's a fandom. Not only there's also, as I said before, there's also an age issue as well. So there's some older folks who probably may not be Twitter active, or Facebook is their preferred format. But of course, all the Facebook groups in this fandom are run by white people. They don't understand they don't understand what microaggressions are. They don't understand. No, you really shouldn't be debating about when Black actors are casted in period dramas and it's not historically accurate. Like, basic stuff like that, they don't understand it at all. And of course, when I found BGC, I was like, oh wait, there's folks who understand these the folks understand all these issues that I face in Dr. Fandom and the Anglophilia section of our fandom. Like, this is a big thing. I don't have to explain myself. So I realize my journey now is pretty much creating the space I want to, because in other spaces it doesn't exist. And there are also times when there are white allies in this fandom, but of course, there are times you don't want to deal with pushback and you don't want to deal with educating people. Because there are some podcasters in Pure Job Fandom that it's like they have to also deal with catering to the general public who are mostly white. So it's sort of like there are times you just want to stay separate from that. And that leads to my next question. The fight or flight response, sort of, how has there been a specific moment when you've chosen to fight and there's a moment you've chosen to flee from racism in your fandom?
Yeah, both.
Just name like one time you decided to flee and one time you decided to fight.
Oh gosh, there's a lot.
I know. Hard to choose one, right?
I have one. This is even my fandom, but before Aquaman came out, they released like the cast photos of the main cast, and I remember tweeting about it and saying, "Oh, look at the diversity," because there's really only 2 people of color in this entire cast. And the shitstorm that fell on me. And I decided once I'm gonna stand my ground. So about 2.5 hours, I argued straight with every white fanboy who came in to attack me, and I just did it. I'm like, I'm gonna do this, and then I hit the wall. I'm like, I can't do it anymore. I'm like, and I locked down my account. I'm like, I'm done. And since then, I haven't fought anybody on a level that big because it's just no. It is not a good feeling. And some people can really like hold that up, but like I can't.
Yeah. It's so much energy. And like I think that feels like there's actually a couple different ways that this situation goes down. There's the situation like Mel described where you see something that you want to call out, you tweet about it, and all of a sudden there's a pile-on and people are yelling at you. The other situation is like sometimes you see somebody saying something that is racist, or maybe like talking about something in a way that, you know, they could use some education on the topic. Like any number of Martha Jones conversations, right, in Doctor Who fandom, in terms of like classic Doctor Who, Talons of Wang Chang, which is like a very racist episode from the 70s. That conversation crops up like every 6 months. It's on a cycle. And sometimes I've like jumped in and engaged, and sometimes I just look and I'm like, you know what? This is not gonna go the way that I think it's gonna go, so I need to just not get involved. And it's not really like a flee, it's more of a just like, I'm gonna leave that there and, you know, just let that be whatever it's gonna be. Because sometimes you just have those arguments so many times, it's like, this is not worth it. And like, I find that to be the hardest part, because like my instinct, especially like, you know, being a teacher and librarian, like you want to correct people and like you want to educate. So like the instinct is there, but I'm trying more and more to like listen to that self-preservation side of me that says, you don't want to get into that fight. Like you don't want to have to ignore your mentions for like, you know, 2 days.
I think I try not to engage with a lot of the stuff that I see, especially on Twitter when book Twitter decides that it's going to be a mess. That more than anything, I go through it so I know what's going on. Very rarely do I decide, okay, it's time to jump in and say something. A lot of people are piling on usually, and a lot of voices are being heard, and I agree with a lot of voices, and I just kind of let that go. But the only con I've ever gone to, which was last year, there was a situation where talking about the crimes of Grindelwald. I forget exactly what the comment was in regards to. Someone was trying to defend a instance in the book. I can't remember if it was the half-elf moment, or Dumbledore being gay but not really shown on screen. And my reaction to it was really visceral in that moment. And that was one of the panels that Portia was on. And I kind of remember doing one of those, did that really just come out of this person's mouth? And I had to address it because it was just it's very interesting when people say things and for them, it's just a very casual, oh yeah, and that's what happened. And for me, I was just like, do you realize what that meant? Like, you brushed that off like it was the simplest thing. And for me, I was almost like, do you have any idea what this instance where you casually mentioned that someone's a half elf on this movie that's already having a problem because of the whole Lita Lestrange, we're not getting into that, but I had to call that out in that moment because I just was flabbergasted by the fact that he didn't realize what had just come out of his own mouth. And afterward, the guy came up to me and he apologized to me about the comment. He's like, I didn't realize what that meant. And I was like, yeah, well, you know, I get that. And then we started having another, like a more in-depth conversation. And he had mentioned the fact that he was gay and how he was just, you know, happy to have representation. And I was like, but we don't have to accept crumbs. Like, this is the bare minimum. Like, the whole Lita Lestrange was the bare minimum. And then it was trash at that. Like, in that moment, I could not say anything. I feel like it's easiest for me to not engage in some situations where I'm not having to deal with that outcome on an extended basis, which is why I choose to flee in instances on Twitter, because it's just not worth it for a lot of it. But in that moment where the opportunity presented itself and that needed to be handled, basically I stepped right in, guns blazing, boom, boom. It just wasn't worth it to not say something in that moment.
Yeah. For me, a lot of, oddly enough, I have one instance I've described before about a Twitter pylon. A lot of times for me, stepping into things like Facebook, because my fandoms are the period drama folks are very active on Facebook versus Twitter. So a lot of times I've seen, like, you know, racist comments about either casting or that wasn't accurate because Black people only existed since, you know, modern times or whatever, or 50s or 40s or whatever. In England, a lot of times it's Brynrush, so it's like, oh, it's not really about Brynrush slavery. Why are they here? So I will jump right in. But then what ends up happening a lot of times is even before there's a crap storm, the mods go, ban, you know? So I was like, oh, well, you made the choice. I had to flee from this conversation because you made that choice for me. You banned me from your group. That's great. One instance of a kind of a fighting moment was one of my favorite shows, Poldark. The last season featured a woman named Kitty Despard who was married to a white guy in real life. They were real historical figures, but the fandom had a meltdown because they weren't in the books Poldark was based on. They were just like, oh, they're just making this up. They're shoehorning this plot. Like, this is not about, now why is this all political and about race and slavery? I'm like, there's mentions of slavery in the books, and there's all the economic drama in the books is caused by slavery. So now this is in your face. Now you guys are having a problem. And of course, they want to pretend that it's only because of, well, that we're getting to stuff. We're not talking about my favorite characters now, or my favorite character is less screen time now because of her and her husband. I'm like, nah, the real point is you thought this is a cute romance drama and now you're faced with a brick wall politics that you didn't know about and now you're angry about it. So, of course, I had some more bans had labeled on me, but on Twitter, I actively engaged folks. And I was like, listen, as a fan of color, this representation, you guys are not going to ruin this for me because you don't like her, because you don't like her husband, and you think her husband's rude or whatever. Like, no, you're not ruining this for me. Because I actually know the history behind it and how important it is that, and this is for once in a show that's so white focused, great for once decent representation. And I'm especially, and a weird thing about that fandom is there are some folks of color who didn't like her, and they didn't want to defend her. And I got to fight with one particular girl, and it resulted in me getting banned from the group because once I screen capture her tweets and her comments, and I was like, here's somebody of color trashing a Black character. This is not really cool. Like, there's some, it was for me, my instinct is usually to fight because there's no, in my fandoms, 9 times out of 10, outside of Outlander fandom, there's gonna be nobody else bringing this up because the fandom is that most folks choose to just not engage at all. So there's nobody ever going to bring this up. And I was like, no, somebody has to say something. We're going to be rude. But I don't always recommend folks doing that because of your own mental health. I'm just often obsessed, and when I see something going on, I will call it out, and I will, and if it's on Facebook, I'll screen cap you and show my Twitter friends just how racist you are. That's kind of how I respond to things. But to my next question for the panel is going back to your half-elf incident. Has there ever been a racist incident in your fandom in real life, at cons or events or whatever else? Because Stacie already mentioned that panel disaster. Has anybody else had that real life incident?
So recently, I was at Gallifrey One, which is a Doctor Who convention out in California. I was talking with a guy who is South Asian in normal clothes, like he was dressed like a person would at a convention in California, like shorts, t-shirt.
Yeah.
And someone apparently asked him. I wasn't there for this. He told me this because a different incident happened while we were talking. He said, "Oh, someone earlier thought I was cosplaying Master because the character this past season on Doctor Who was played by a South Asian actor." And I was like, "Did he ask you that because you're brown?" He was like, "What?" I was like, "I think that's what it was." And I was so offended, but and then I kind of was like, "Wait, was this this was a white dude who asked you this, right?" And he was like, "Well, maybe, yeah." He was just trying to be like very nice about it and be like, "Oh, it's not a big deal." I was like, "I think this is a big deal. That's racist." But that's actually probably the first time I've heard of any, like, either indirectly or directly encountered anything like that at Galley, or really any Doctor Who con, because I think in general, like, I don't know, in Doctor Who fandom, people like to keep it under wraps. Like, they only say the worst stuff online. Like, they're not going to start those conversations in person, because I think it's just, I don't know, it just feels like really different.
Mel, any in real life experiences?
The first cons that I went to when I was a teenager were anime cons, and I used to cosplay. I still cosplay, but like back then when I cosplayed, pretty much 99% of people in anime look white. So a lot of fans assume that they are white. So like if I'm going to cosplay a character, it looks like I'm cosplaying a white person. So like I went as a character from Gundam Wing, and most people were nice about it, but I did get like a few people were asking like, "Why are you doing this? You're black. You shouldn't be doing this. Like, you don't fit the character. You should just stop." And like, that's not something you want to hear when you're young and you're just starting out and you're like, I was just trying to do something fun with the character that I liked. Why is this such a problem? I mean, why is this hurting you? Because like, it doesn't seem like it should affect you at all. It has nothing to do with you.
Yeah, for me, back in the cosplay days, well, I don't mean obviously COVID, I don't cosplay like in person anymore, but at cons and you're cosplaying a white character and you're black, like you get that random person all like, "Why are you dressed up like that?" I'm like, "Because I have money and I have a job and I want to look cute." Like, that's kind of why. Or one time I was in New York Comic Con randomly, I was wearing Emma Swan from Once Upon a Time, and somebody thought I was Storm. And I'm like, first of all, folks who know me know I don't really watch or care about the superheroes. So I'm like, that's really weird. But I don't remember her ever wearing a red jacket. I'm like, you just asked me that because I'm wearing a blonde wig and I'm brown. Like, I don't see any character art that looks anything remotely similar at all. Like, I'm like, that was totally weird. And somebody white said it totally smelled like, that's weird. Like, there's no way. Like, it's one thing if you've ever like close in terms of like another character the same thing, like same style of clothing on. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Like, it's fine. Like, for example, it's fine if I'm in Outlander and somebody's like Hamilton because it's the same era roughly, and I'm like, that's fine, but or call me, whatever. But I'm like, yeah, Storm, that was clearly you need glasses for real.
Well, it's a failure of imagination, right? Like, I think that when you grow up watching shows where everyone does not look like you, like, right, like nobody looks like you in the shows that you watch. Like, you can imagine yourself dressing up as those characters or whatever, and like that's just the thing you have to do. I think it's really hard for people who are used to just seeing themselves represented all the time, like imagining themselves as not a character of their own race, right? Like, I mean, Amanda and I have had a conversation. I don't like to cosplay. Number one, because I'm deeply uncomfortable with the idea of like being in costume and having people look at me. That's like one thing. But also, I've had like bad experiences when I was in like middle school for Halloween, like dressing up as characters from, like movies or shows that I liked, and people being like, "Who are you supposed to be?" Or like when I was in high school, when Harry Potter was huge, people would be like, "Oh, you should dress like Cho Chang." Why?
Why?
Like, that's the only character I can be. And so I've just always found it like hugely frustrating. And like I said, I think it's just a huge failure of imagination.
Yeah.
Totally. In the comments, Cordelia mentioned the reaction to Black characters in Downton Abbey. Oh yeah, probably its own panel. What happens when British period drama fans see Black folks on stage? It's just awful. I was not as Twitter active back then, but I did see it. Like Jack Ross got a lot of hate, and it was clearly racist hate because it was totally plausible for him to be a jazz musician in England in the 20s. Like it was the whole history of it was sound. It's just they were angry that all of a sudden our cute, happy, sometimes a soap opera is all now race is a factor, and now I have to be offended because it's too political. Like this, yeah.
I hate that. It's always political. Why is it political?
Why is it political that we exist? Because we do exist. It's really frustrating. Now, we've all had negative experiences sometimes with white fans, but have there been moments when white allies have stepped up to the plate and separated themselves from the racists at an instant? I'm just curious here.
Well, it's funny because Maggie, our dear Maggie, I love our Maggie in BGC. She was on the panel with Bayana, Robin, and Delia, I think, and they were talking about how this space that they've created is one that, uplifts Black women. And if you come into this space and can't respect that, then you're not going to be welcome in the space. And Maggie was like, yeah, I'm in there and I love it. Like, it was one of those moments where it's like, we have people in this space who are fully comfortable in this space because they see us all as human beings and they respect our lived experiences. They don't try and combat those lived experiences. And they do go to bat for us when necessary. It's just one of those moments you look back at it and you see moments where people think they're being helpful and they don't realize that they're speaking over your voice instead of uplifting your voice. And I feel like white allies know to uplift the voice and back that voice up instead of talk over that voice. And that's not something we see enough. And funnily enough, when the author that should not be named finally outed herself for what she really is, we finally saw a lot of these bigger groups, I'm not going to give them really any credit because it was the bare minimum after everything that has happened and everything that has been called out and everyone already being vocal about the problems. That was finally the time where they kind of had to push themselves back and really reevaluate. And I don't think a lot of people really ever have looked at the history of everything and finally said, because there's never been an apology on the stances that were being attacked before. They had, BGC was on the panel that was just wait and see. And that's when a lot of the times where these people that pretended to be allies very much silenced everyone's voice that had an opinion before these prequels really started to come out about how bad the representation already was. And it's been rare where we've seen people be allies from the beginning. A lot of people have come up now because it's just become egregious, basically. But when we find them, we get them and they ride. So it's been it's one of those moments where when when someone's really got your back because they do everything that they need to make sure that your voice is heard and they don't try and step over it. I think in our crew, we've got that. That's for sure.
Anything else about that question?
I mean, I think I'm really lucky because I fell into Doctor Who fandom and really by chance found a really great group of people who are predominantly white. Like, I think I'm one of a handful of people in our friend group who are not white, but they're all people who care about racial justice. They're not always doing it exactly right, but they at least want to be and try in various ways, right? Like to do the right thing. Like my podcast co-producer, he was the person who asked me. He was like, "Would you like to, be on the show as a panelist?" And like that was the first podcast I had ever done, and I wouldn't have even thought that I could do something like that if he hadn't have said like, "Yeah, I would really like you to, come on the show and talk about whatever it was that I talked about that first time." I think though that going back to what Stacie was saying, the real test though is like who's going to show up for you when you really need it.
Yeah.
And I love my friends. My friends are wonderful people. And I did have to have it wasn't really a conversation. I kind of made a statement and then was just like, this is it. I was like, listen, I am not gonna like come into this space, like our, friend group chat space, and talk about things that are bothering me that are happening in fandom, like where people are coming at me for saying something was racist. I can't do that because I didn't feel supported by any of you, so I don't even know why I'm talking about it with you. And so I love you all. I think you're all great, but that's just a conversation I'm no longer going to have. And, I don't know really what that does at all, except just kind of like protect me as a person from feeling like, I don't know, disappointed in people. But I think it's a calculus of, are those people no longer my friends? No, of course not. Like they're still my friends. They're just not the friends I'm going to rely on to show up for me. And actually for me, it's kind of like a thing where sometimes stuff like that happens in Doctor Who fandom. And I actually don't want to bring it to the BGC space because I feel like we are all so burdened with this nonsense all the time, where I feel like, no, I want my white friends to show up and go after this, nonsense. But that has also like disappointed me recently. So it's it's mixed bag. Overall, I think that like probably in any fandom there's great people to be found. But I think the thing that we're all kind of like talking about more now is what we really need is like action. It's great to have the beliefs, but we want to see what are you doing.
For sure. I mean, that's sort of like, that's not why I have this fandom to begin with, because in my fandoms, it was like pulling teeth. It's just when there's racist comments on Facebook, for example, obviously the admins of these groups are going to be trash and let stuff sit there, but are you going to at least confront these people in the comment section? Because in the British queer drama fandoms, there's not a lot of folks of color, and even worse, there are times when you have folks of color agreeing with racist comments. So it's like, white allies, this is your moment to, you guys believe this stuff, you guys need to be there too when it comes to issues of racial issues. Like, for example, like when there's people who are being bigoted about LGBTQ folks, I'm there in the comment section like, hey, that's big, that's homophobic, you should probably check yourself before you wreck yourself. Oh wait, you already did. But the folks who will step into those conversations about race, they're there, but it's not a lot of times. Even your white allies will step back because they're like, I don't want to get attacked by these people. I'm like, but we kind of need that because otherwise they're just going to run roughshod. In places like Harry Potter and Doctor Who fandom, I feel like there's more of an understanding of the white fans at least knowing that stuff is wrong. In some other spaces, it doesn't happen that way. Like the majority will be white folks want to keep things white. focused as well. Now, I'm looking at comments very quick. Second. Now, Joy, you mentioned solutions. What do we want folks to do in these situations in fandom? And it's for, like, we've all mentioned all this bad stuff that happens, but what do we want people to do? Anybody can
I think one of the biggest things we want people to do is listen before they get called out. Because a lot of times we're seeing that people are willing to let the abuse or willing to let the, microaggression slide because not enough people are calling them out for it. And it ends up becoming a snowball effect where they just keep going and going and going and going, thinking they're untouchable until something finally happens that they have to address. And if they had been listening from the forefront, we would never have to get to this point. Issues where, things are happening at cons and people are speaking up and speaking out, and the people at the top aren't listening because it's only affecting them so much. This is something that we can ignore for a little bit longer. So I'm just going to push it to the side until the dam overflows. And now you've got to deal with all this pushback. You had listened to the voices that were trying to heed you off before it had gotten to this point, you'd be in a better position. People have been telling you for years that some of these positions that you're taking are wrong. People have been saying for a while, maybe you should rethink the way that this is going. If you ignore those voices that are trying to keep up and stop you from hurting yourself, then you can start laying a better foundation towards, a bigger community and a more welcoming community as a whole. There are places that I don't follow at all anymore because it's really, really just obvious how much they don't care about people that don't look like them or whose opinions opposite from what gives them comfort. For example, when with this fandom, the Nick Genie stuff happened and everyone was like, wait, this can't be where we're going with this. And they're like, oh, just wait. Everything's going to be fine. This is so great. She's been thinking about this for years. Don't you just love it? And I'm like, no, you don't see how problematic this is. Like, this is probably one of the worst instances we've seen where we're taking something that's original and then destroying it. And so many people were so welcoming of this newfound revelation. I'm like, y'all didn't spend enough time with these books to think that this is okay. Like, but that's one instance where we see people allow or just accept what's being fed to them until they can't deny how trash things have become in this fandom that people have loved. And I sat back and watched that rodeo and hopped in and out of that controversy because I just couldn't believe what I was seeing and the response I was getting, because I feel like at that point, a certain someone was untouchable to a lot of people, while people in our Slack were very much like, no, this is heading downhill about as fast as we've ever seen somebody fall. And it wasn't until they finally got to rock bottom that we finally saw people go, oh, we just didn't realize. No, because you weren't paying attention. No one was being forced to pay attention. So here we are.
I think that one of the problems in Doctor Who fandom is something actually that our friend Tygwin talked about a couple years ago at Galley. In Doctor Who fandom, there is like an official representation through like the official magazine. And she made such a good point. She showed actually in this keynote talk that she gave about fandom and like race and fandom, like the pictures that we present of Doctor Who fandom in Doctor Who magazine, like the things that we see, it's like overwhelmingly white. And it is not an overwhelmingly white fandom. There's a huge presence of the show in non-white countries, like Brazil, like in Korea. And like, this is why the show actually took the show on a publicity tour all around the world, because it is really popular in places where it's not the UK. And yet, the face of fandom is always white people. And recently the magazine launched this feature that was like a diverse group of young people, like all like kids in their 20s, various races. And that feature is now gone because the readership didn't like it because they didn't like hearing from young people of color talking about the show from their perspective. And like, I wish that feature could have lived on, but we shouldn't be hanging all our hopes on one thing. And I think part of the solution for that comes from just amplifying voices in meaningful ways. So like, I don't know necessarily what else it is other than just like alerting people to the fact that like, hey, Black TARDIS exists. You should go follow that account because it's amazing and you're going to learn something because it's really great. And just actually recognizing that people are there. And I think actually Nicole like put together this great Twitter list of, you know, she did like a roll call. If you're, you know, a Doctor Who fan of color, like raise your hand and I'll add you to this list. I think knowing that you have people out there makes the environment a little bit friendlier and makes it a little bit easier to raise your voice, so that hopefully, you know, that helps with visibility. But then the second part really is, I think that there are not only like white fans, but people who are, you know, in somewhat positions of power that need to recognize that they can't just be relying on the same old like white voices to talk about the show and the fandom and represent that, you know, that side of things, because that's just not what it looks like. And it's certainly not what the fandom is to me anymore. So I don't know, I think it's a really big problem with a lot of sides to it, but unfortunately, I think the problem that could be addressed easiest and fastest right now is visibility.
Yeah. Because in my spaces, we have the Blacklanders, we have in terms of pure drama fandom, Drunk Austin and oh gosh, there's one other people I'm gonna forget in a second, and they're gonna yell at me for forgetting about them. Bonnet to Dawn, they have POC members on their teams, but the thing is, the rest of the fandom, aside from those three groups and a couple of bloggers here and there, all the people who do all the official stuff are white. The people who are behind behind PBS and those stations are all white. And every time the thing about fandom is discussed, it's always white fans being represented. And folks like me out there are we're doing work, but very rarely do we get any recognition for it. Like even on Twitter, there was a list of, I'll follow these creators and bloggers of color. The list was literally 8 people.
Wow.
That's people like, that's it. And that was only because I had to, and obviously, I mean, period drama and, you know, historical romance novels and stuff, that was obviously there's a whole community of color over there. But when it comes to like discussing pop culture, it was literally 8 folks. I'm like, this is weird. Bad. Like, we are so, compared to Harry Potter and Doctor Who, we are so far behind that there is only 8 folks on this list, and technically it's more than 8 because again, like the Blacklanders is technically 20 something folks. So I'm like, that Twitter thing is just one person runs the account. I'm like, that's bad. That in total, like there's 8 accounts here and maybe at best 30 people on this whole list. That's not cute.
Yeah.
Oh, we're a long way away from this. It's not. It is crazy. As actually there's a comment earlier from someone who said that they've been kicked out of so many groups for trivia groups for calling out racism and bigotry. I'm like, yep, that's me. My ban list is at 7 or 8 now for pure drama or cold dark related things, because I either called out racism or sexism. That's another one they don't like. Things don't like. Yeah, women don't like getting called out on their sexism at all. Don't do it, but you should anyway.
Yeah, like I belong to a lot of fandoms that are dominated by white women, and like Stacie said, listening is so key. Yeah. And as part of that is to, when you get that feeling, to be defensive, because a lot of them mean well. They mean so well, and they don't think they have a racist bone in their body. But like, if you call them out, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, no, I'm not going to listen to this, because like immediately my walls come up because I can't hear this. This goes against everything I know about myself, and I just don't believe you. So like, to check that defensiveness and to take a moment and listen to what the person is telling you, because we're not attacking you. We're not telling you you're a horrible person. We're just saying this one thing you did was not okay. and you can learn from this moment and you can move on, or you can completely ignore me and get worse. So like, it's up to you.
Yeah. For me, it's sort of like, I even have to teach people how to say this phrasing or this critique is a dog whistle. What a dog whistle means is X, Y, and Z, because they don't even realize that's what they're saying is a problem, because all their lives they've only had to deal with, white folks. I'm like, this is dog whistle. This phrase is racist. Oh, no. You saying that folks of color didn't exist this time, it's historically inaccurate and racist. You're using that as, it's sort of like, I literally go step one on racism 101 with folks. And a lot of times, if they just listen to me or other people going in a conversation before defending themselves, or when they treat being called a racist as like a name call, I'm like, no, it's your actions that are. But if you're going to keep defending yourself in that way, I'm going to do nothing else except call you on your behavior some more. So yeah, listening is definitely important, and also just doing some reading on your own. Like, Google is free, for real. Google is definitely free. All right, we're getting the 5-minute warning on. If there's any questions or comments in the chat like that, do one last shot to get some answers from us as well. So it is sort of it. Yeah, if I wish folks would listen, and I also would wish that folks would pick up a history book and notice that the reason why you don't see Black characters in TV shows is because the history has erased us from completely different times and eras. So it's only now you're seeing things because we're correcting the record. Like, what is history is wrong.
I'm really interested to see what's going to happen. I mean, even now, like a couple months later, but, I'll give people maybe another few months to finish their books and their reading. But, everyone like went on this like spree of buying all these books on how to be right? Learning the history. How is that going to then manifest, right? Like, my biggest hope is that it leads to good things in like the actual world that I live in terms of like professional spaces and like, et cetera, et cetera. But with fandom, I think that it's really hard sometimes for people to make the connection that like, hey, racism can be here too. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't just go away because we're talking about this fun thing that we really love. And I'm really curious to see how that reading, if it happens, is internalized, because I want to believe, like, in good faith, that people bought those books with the intention to like read and learn. How is it gonna show up? Mm-hmm.
Okay, Nicola's question. I may have missed it, but what has been the most welcoming fandom for you as a Black woman? Okay, for me, I would say Doctor Who right off the bat, because I kind of just stepped into that space, and for the most part, people were pretty welcoming to it. And it also helped that I was started mostly at in-person cons when people are less likely to cheer face racist. What has your experience been like? The best fandom for being Black or person of color?
That's hard.
I stay in one space. I stay in BGC. So, I mean, that's basically home for me. As far as fandoms go, I feel like I can hit all of my fandoms there and just be me and not have to worry about anything else. So that's it. I'm a creature of comfort. If it don't bring me peace, it brings me problems. So I'm just a place of peace. And I've stayed there. Shout out to my Nina for that one. She's been using that phrase for the last year, and it fits every situation. If it doesn't bring me peace, it brings me problems.
Mel, what's your question?
I honestly can't think of one.
Hey,
because like when I started off in Doctor Who, it was not a pleasant place to be, and it wasn't a pleasant place to be for a long time.
Yeah,
that's pretty much all things.
Right. Yeah. I think the only reason why I had a slightly better time with Doctor Who fandom is that very early on I started event organizing, so people had to take me seriously, even though I am, I'm Black and mixed. So I'm like, yeah, you have to take me seriously because I'm in charge of this, and I can kick you out. That's why you have to, So that kind of paved the way in a sense for me, but I know that other people had to struggle, and hopefully we'll be better off. But yeah, I mean, BGC has been always welcome. Now that I like realizing, oh wait, there's more to y'all than Harry Potter. It's like, oh, this is perfect place. And the Blacklanders, it's the one place in Outlander fandom I don't have to fight folks. Actually, there was a random question about Outlander. Oh yeah, start the show because the books are very long. Very long. That's off topic.
Good question.
Yeah, off topic. Yeah. It's like, oh my goodness, we are at our hour. Oh, it's already been an hour since we've been talking.
I guess so.
Thanks everyone out there in BGC internet space for participating in this panel. Quick word from our panelists on where you can find them to continue this conversation, since it's a really good one. Sadly, we ran over our time, and we might. I don't want to slide into the next activity time. So yeah, where can they find you? Start with Mel.
I'm on Twitter at Jane_Anon.
Cool.
I am on Twitter at InquiringJoy.
And I'm on Twitter at _next_book. I talk a lot of trash all the time, and books. Most of the trash as of late.
On Twitter, I'm at Amanda-Rae Prescott. And any of us will be welcome to like have additional questions and comments after this panel. And it lives on YouTube now. So thanks all so much for participating and coming along on the ride for me. Literally, I was gonna write this as like an article, but I decided, no, I'll do it as a panel instead. Thanks everyone, and thanks everyone for participating. Thanks for all the questions as well. All right.